Hi, my name is Sid Chopra, and I'm here with Colonel Carlos Vega. Colonel Vega, you are working with the cyber team at the Military Academy at West Point. And we're here today at the Southeast Regional Cybersecurity and Technology Symposium. What's West Point's interest in this conference?
West Point has an interest in the sense of the Army Cyber Institute is at West Point. And it has a national mission to share knowledge and share practices with the private sector, academia, and other members of the cyber enterprise. And so we have to reach out and go to their venues, their events, and share what the best practices are in the community, also what the government or the Army has to offer as far as resources where we can work together on shared problems.
Now, we have heard repeatedly that this is a massive threat to our infrastructure, to our economy, to the military, to the government. We're dealing with very sophisticated attackers that are well-funded, well-educated, and well-motivated. We're dealing with nation states in some cases. As a head of an organization, let's say, how could I leverage what you're doing to protect my organization?
So we share a lot of the knowledge that we gain in our experience. So one thing we do is we realize that the threat is ever present. And as we get more dependent on the technology and there's new gadgets and gizmos that come out, we're only exposing ourselves more. We're not going to change that anytime soon. But what we do have the opportunity to influence that space is we can start to prepare and train and practice to how to respond to threats in cyber. So one thing that the military is known for is we train very well. We train constantly, and it's almost a way of life, not just an event that you do. So what we try to do is we use the mantra of train like you fight, fight like you train. So that in the event of an issue, not a break in your business practice, but an actual crisis, you can revert back to your training and how you plan for that so that you could respond accordingly. We don't always train to failure. We don't always train to the catastrophic event. We train to where business processes affect our business, but that's not necessarily enough. You have to push the envelope to where the livelihood of the company, of what you're about, is being challenged, because that's where the real change in behavior is going to occur. If you're just doing day-to-day operations, that is not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on how to handle crisis.
I see from a very limited vantage point, the problems that we have in cyberspace, the attacks, I read things in the newspaper. But I'm looking out. I'm looking into a problem that is a foreign world to me. You're in that world. You are working with the military. How do you see threats, and what threats do you see that I'm not aware of? What should be on my radar that isn't on my radar?
From the intelligence community to what the private sector can gather, we can see a lot of the same things by opening the newspaper and seeing what the threats that are out there. Who's doing it may be different, or what their motivation is. We might have different insights on that. But if you are the target of an attack, what you do and how you respond to that may not, you don't have to come up with a scenario for that. That is really happening, and perhaps happened, or if not, may happen tomorrow. So instead of concentrating on who might attack you, put some effort and some thought into what would I do if I was attacked. Because if you're getting let's say, punched in the face, it doesn't matter if it's coming from this person or that person, you're still getting punched in the face. Learn how to defend against the punch in the face. To that point, one of the things that we train our soldiers for, or our young soldiers, is how to fight. Not because we think it's important that they learn how to fight, it's because it's an experience of fear where we train them how to protect themselves and how to react. And in our business in the Army, there's a lot of fear. We do a lot of things that most people don't get to do. And you might say we're adrenaline junkies, but a lot of that training, jumping out of airplanes, is because you have to learn to respond and learn how to do some of these things that are really unnatural in some instances, and you have to rely on your training. So we use these events where there's real fear, and we train you to respond and how to react to that appropriately. Because what's important about that is I need to know how you react. Because when you're working in a team, everybody reacts differently to different inputs, different fears. Some people get loud, some people get quiet. You have to know how to read your team. And so it's more than just how to experience fear individually, but how to experience this collectively as a team. How is your team going to react? We know in our families how we react to stress because we live it every day. We don't even think about it. But how are you going to react in a truly high-stress environment where your livelihood is at stake? What are you going to do to prepare for that? But you're also reliant on the skills and abilities of the people left and right of you. How are they testing their abilities? How are they going to react? How is it going to be predictable? And if you have shortcomings, you want to find that out in practice, not in the actual event. And in all of these events, you're probably going to have to reach outside your organization to get help. You want to practice that too, to see what type of help you're going to get. In a typical crisis that most of us would be familiar with, where we call 911, we know that we're going to get a dispatcher, there's an ambulance, fire, police that are going to respond in a certain amount of time, and you know what assets are probably going to bring. And the policeman's probably going to be the first one. It might be just one officer. If you've never made that call, that's pretty accurate what you can expect. What can you expect if you have a cyber crisis?
Who do you call?
Who do you call?
What assets do you bring to bear?
What are they going to bring? What do you have? What if there's a delta? What if you don't have enough? You want to find that out in advance. You want to test those procedures. You want to test that when something doesn't go as planned, because it will never go as planned. That's not the value in it. The plan is not the important thing. The planning is everything. And we use that in the military quite a bit. The plan is thrown out. It's irrelevant when you make first contact with the enemy. But it's all the planning that goes into it that is very valuable, because you start thinking of all the contingencies, all of the what ifs, and you start to plan for those, and they may not all manifest. And what you actually see may be completely different, but you have thought about what's not going to work already. And so when you get to those decisions, collectively the team has an idea of what to do and what to expect from each other. And that's the part is you train for your Super Bowl well in advance, because when that event occurs, you want to perform like you're a Super Bowl caliber team. Otherwise, you're going to train as if it's a pickup game with whoever's on the playground with you. And that might not be enough. And if you're a professional company, you better train like a professional company.
Colonel Vega, the military has been well known for training individuals. And corporations are pretty good at training individuals too. And with cybersecurity, it's new, it's a threat, but we've got people that do training and education for some of those people. What it seems like we don't have is experience about how these people will perform in a crisis. And not only the people, but how does our team perform in a crisis? Have you been working in this area and looking at these dynamics, and what can you tell us about
So what we
how
do,
we should prepare?
that's a good point of training. There's different types of training. There's a training that what an individual is expected to know. And there's individuals, that's our individual task. A collective task is what a group is supposed to know. And then we get our large organization, and we start to train the larger organization, and there are more dynamics on that. But you have to understand the basic knowledge that everybody has as you're going forward, because it all builds on itself. So the fundamentals have to be understood, that everybody is expected to do this in this situation. As you start getting into crisis management, a crisis isn't usually an individual event. It's a team event where you have to start to train the team is going to respond to this. And that's where the leadership has responsibility and the individuals have responsibility on the team objective. When you deal with crisis, it's not dealing with just your basic breakdown in a business process. You're talking about something that's major, it's going to affect the entire organization. So you have stakeholders, internal, stakeholders, external, and you have to be prepared to address those issues. In cyber, we often mistakenly think it's a technical issue, and your cyber team or your techies are going to respond to that. That's not the case. It's an organizational issue. The leadership is going to respond to the crisis. You've heard of all the multiple data breaches. Have you heard any of the tech people say, this is what happened and I take responsibility for it? Or do you see the leader standing out there saying, this is what happened and we take responsibility for it? Or you see their picture on the cover of the Wall Street Journal or New York Times of the former leader who did not respond appropriately. The crisis for some it's bigger than others based on the type of organization you have, but we can start getting ahead of that by practicing and training for these major events. And that's something that is not done at the individual level, it's done at the team level, and it's an organizational training, not just your techies, their training.
So if I'm a corporate leader, I have to, ultimately the buck is going to stop with me. And it may be somebody else's fault, but I'm going to be the front face of it. I'm going to probably take the biggest brunt of it. If it's my responsibility to do something about it, what can I look to you for to help me prepare my team and my organization for the unfortunate crisis that would occur if somebody hacked into our systems?
You know, that's a very good question, because we don't put the responsibility on the leader to say that he's responsible for everything. A good leader, we know that. You don't have to tell him that. But the leader has a responsibility to enable his team to react to the crisis. In some organizations, you might find where everyone is waiting for the direction of what you're going to do. What does he want us to do or she want us to do? And we're in action until we get guidance. In this discipline, the crisis happens very, very fast, and it can be catastrophic very, very fast. You have to be able to take immediate action sometimes to prevent your data from leaving your network. And you have to, as an employee, know how much exercise of that authority do you have to react to the crisis. And as a leader, you have to make sure your subordinates or your team members know how much they're allowed to do or not do given the crisis. When do things get elevated? I had a situation where my network was compromised in the military, and I saw my computer systems were being compromised one by one by one, and it just started growing exponentially, and I knew pretty soon that our system was going to get taken over. I had to shut the network down. I went, I spoke to my general. I knew what the type of authority he gave me to act. And I informed him as soon as I could after I took the action that this is what we did, and we shut the network down. It was in the middle of an important brief for him, and his response was, okay, good, you have that authority. But this was also during a training exercise. He knew what I was going to do, what my immediate action drills were, and also if they were out of bounds, we were figuring that out in a training environment. Because you may not have that luxury of having the leadership near you when this happens, or in the corporate world, it might be in the middle of the night or on a weekend. And are you going to call the boss on the weekend to inform him of this crisis? And the answer to that is, given the predetermined circumstances, yes, you would. But you don't want to figure that out or try to second guess what those circumstances are going to be on Friday night or Saturday morning or Sunday morning. You want that discussion to happen Monday through Friday during the regular operating hours, because it becomes routine. And now you're starting to operate with your team, and you have expectations of what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And you also know when you're accepting more risk and when you're not accepting the risk. But as a leader, we accept risk. We know that. As technicians, we have to be better of informing our leaders on what that risk might look like so that they're prepared. And the idea of working together and training together in this environment so that when the crisis occurs, you revert back to your training and you have an expectation of what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. There are no surprises that are going to make the situation worse because someone acted out of turn. For instance, you probably have someone who's responsible for engaging the media. They know how to engage the media. They know who to engage. You don't want whoever picks up the phone at that hour of crisis and it's the media and they take it upon themselves to start to share everything that's going on. You want them to acknowledge, or whatever your training says to do, to direct that to the people who are responsible for that. Same thing goes with whoever's responsible for the technical things. You want to be able to direct that to them and be able to reach them and know what everyone is going to do on this team. You want to know where everyone on the playing field is doing, what their capabilities are, and in a time of crisis, where they are and where you expect them to be once they're notified. You don't want a surprise. You don't want everyone standing around looking for guidance. You want people reacting appropriately to this challenge.
So if I would to very broadly say we should have a crisis management plan for a cyber attack, and we need to make sure that that plan is communicated to all the players up and down the food chain, up and down the organization, so that when it occurs, should it occur, we don't have people freak out, that they say, okay, I've identified the problem, I've identified the situation, here is the plan that we're going to execute, and if we need to divert from it, we can, but I know that here's what I need to do, here's what I need to communicate, here's who I need to communicate to, and that I'm empowered to react, that I'm not taking a personal risk. We've all agreed these are the things that we should do. Would that be, is there something else that I'm missing?
No, you're spot on, but let me just elaborate on that a little bit.
Absolutely.
If your house is on fire and there's a fire extinguisher there,
put it out.
grab the fire extinguisher and put it out. Okay? I don't want you to fight the whole fire, but I also want you to call 911. I want you to get help here right away. And we know that's everybody's responsibility. If you have an incident in cyber, it's the tech's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility to different levels. If your computer and you're the operator and it's compromised and you see something happening on it that's giving you indications that there's something wrong here, you know, the adage of see something, say something. You have a responsibility what you're going to do. You are perhaps that first fire extinguisher, or at least the person who pulls the alarm. or at least the person who calls 911. Oftentimes we have, we call them COOPs, it's a continuity of operations that allows, it says how we're going to back up our systems and how we're going to recover from a technical failure. Sometimes some organizations see that as that's the tech's issue, that's your IT group's responsibility. They may have a main part in that, but that's the organization's responsibility. And it's one of the many plans that you have for crisis. The cyber crisis is an aspect of that. And even if it's let's just say it's a physical threat where there's a fire, what are you doing to back up your systems in case the premise is on fire and you have your systems that are being jeopardized here? So when we talk about planning for crisis, the crisis may manifest in many ways. Cyber is an aspect of it, and it's not isolated from the rest of the plan. It's not that something someone else is going to do for you. But it's one of those disciplines right now where the threat is ever present. I don't know what the statistics are, but there's probably more exposure to cyber threats right now than to fire.
Oh, wow.
But we have,
absolutely, I guess.
but we have fire alarms all over the place. We have fire extinguishers, and we have emergency exits posted everywhere through regulation, through OSHA, through all kinds of different ways. We know what to do for a fire, and none of us are firemen. What do we do for cyber? Those things are evolving. That's where we're evolving to. And what we're trying to do is share the best business practices of those who are leading that charge, those who are doing it well, with those who haven't thought about that yet, so you don't have to relearn their lessons, and we can share this collectively as a community. Because if, like in a community, if your house is on fire, you're a threat to me. I don't want your house to burn. The more secure you are, the more secure I am, because we're protecting the community, we're protecting the enterprise. And in cyber, this is an interconnected community, an interconnected enterprise, an interconnected ecosystem that we're all operating in.
So, I guess the way I would understand the reason why West Point and the military is so interested in what the businesses and communities are actually doing outside the military is that we depend upon each other. You have contractors and subcontractors that are providing services to the military, and the servicemen go home to their spouses and their kids and things like that, and our exposure can become your exposure. Is
that's fair? And let's take it a little farther in this comparison, or to see where we benefit from one another. The private sector, they're the leaders in innovation in this space. The government does some things, but when it comes to technology, the private sector is leading the way. The new and interesting research is coming out of academia. Multiple universities across the country are doing research in cyber or new technologies. So how do we leverage their capability and capacity so that we could defend our nation? We may have a problem where a solution already exists. We realize that we have to reach out to the private sector. We have to reach out to academia so that we could work together. This infrastructure is shared. We don't have a separate internet, per se, that is just ours. So the private sector actually owns most of the space that we operate on. So we have a shared risk, a shared responsibility. As we look at this shared space, we realize that we have to do this together. This is a team sport. And it's not just working with the Army, it's working with the other branches of the armed forces, and working with other government, and working with DHS, working with the FBI. And the idea is when you have a crisis, you have a plan that's appropriate for you. And by the way, we're also members of your community, and the same vulnerabilities that I'm experiencing are the ones you're probably experiencing. And if we have solutions for that are known, how can we best share that? And even that is still evolving. But at events like this, we get to share some of the best business practices. And one of them was how to respond to crisis. Another is how to train the workforce. And how do we interact with this explosion of Internet of Things, of this new exposure that we have for attacks and vulnerabilities. And basically, by working together with the community, we're learning and sharing our knowledge, and they're learning and sharing their knowledge. And most of the people we work with here are private sector and academia. And so coming here to the research triangle, where there's a large cluster of technologists and military and major universities all within arm's reach, it's an event that the Army Cyber Institute has been supporting since it started.
So if I were to want to engage the Army Cyber Institute as a private citizen, what are the things that I would try to, how would I characterize you to my team?
So as a private citizen, it's I would say it's beyond that scope. We work with organizations, and what we try to do is work with the leaders of different either research institutions or associations or groups. What makes this event here attractive to us is this organization brings that group together. And so we can come here with a few of our experts, and we can share the knowledge with a large audience.
So you're not working with individuals, you're not even really working with corporations. What you're looking at is ecosystems.
The ecosystem, exactly. Associations, conglomerates,
Right.
Where we can share it with a lot of people, because we don't focus on just one organization. We focus on the community.
All right. Is there, at this conference, we've at this is the second Southeast Regional Cybersecurity and Technology Symposium. What takeaways did you come away with that we should all know?
Being a member of this discipline for many years now, this conference here, although it's only a second year, I noticed that it's actually getting more technical. You can get more technical now. We used to say, share the information at the lowest level because people don't understand. As a community, I think that awareness and understanding is rising. And one of the presentations that was discussed today from the senior research scientist in the Army Research Lab was inspiring and really related to many of the people in that audience who, most were not technologists, but they can see the challenges of technology of the future and both the opportunities. So the idea that we're embracing this more and we're not shying away from it. We're not saying it's somebody else's problem. It's our problem. It's our problem at work. It's our challenge at home. It's our challenge in our day-to-day life. And this technology is both enabling us, but it's also creates some risk. And we, as individuals, manage risk every day, whether it's at home or whether it's in the office. Whether I'm a leader or an organization or whether I'm just being a dad, we manage risk. Us and this community coming together to share knowledge with a larger audience, a diverse audience, makes these events worth it because there's a takeaway, and that is that we're sharing this, and they're better prepared or more aware of what to do after this conference than they were before they got here.
This morning, we got to hear from General Paul Nakasone.
Nakasone,
sorry. Do they need the room? Okay.
How do you
Go ahead.
pronounce his name?
Nakas.
Do you pronounce the E, or do you just...
Nakasone.
You do pronounce the E?
Nakasone.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Like the Sony hat?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Nakasone. So this morning, we got to hear from Four-Star General Paul Nakasone. Nakasone. We got to hear from Four-Star General Paul Nakasone about the threat that we're all exposed to. And I have to tell you, it's terrifying. And when we're talking to less sophisticated organizations that, for example, in healthcare, they're so bombarded, it's so hard just to get their basic job done, the basic functions that they have. When you throw on cybersecurity and all this other stuff, they get overwhelmed, and I've seen too many organizations saying, I'm going to throw up my hands. This is beyond my ability. And if the military can get hacked, if the Google and Facebook and all these guys can hack, what chance do I have? What would you tell someone like that has resigned themselves to the fates?
So it's some of us are more exposed than others. You're more exposed through many ways. One of them is through your practice, whatever it is that you do, your behavior. And that you do have control over. But others, it's because of the business we're in. Or I'm a corporation, or I'm a leader in a corporation, so I may be more of a target than somebody else. So you don't need to walk around like you're a walking target. Throughout the conference, you heard discussions on what some of the threats were from General Nakasone and the dynamics of the threats and some of the exposure that we have. You heard from the senior Army research scientist for Army Research Lab, who spoke about the possibilities of the future and how to look at some of these challenges. And in the breakout sessions, you heard what we're doing to educate from the university level, how we're training people to protect, and others, we talked about some of the standards for protection. And so you can, if you look at the event holistically, you were provided some solutions on how to manage that risk. But we have to talk about the risk. Just like we talk about our teenagers and driving a car and that death is a possibility, but we surround them with a car that has passed some type of inspection, depending on the state. We license them, we train them, we tell them what the rules are, we have police who check, and we have a whole ecosystem to protect drivers while they're driving, even young ones. What we're evolving to in this discipline is hopefully down that path. We're still very early in the life of this discipline.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of undefined and new threats that are coming up. But there's a lot happening in parallel to attack that, to counter that. Our part at the Army Cyber Institute is to reach out to the private sector and academia so we can leverage what they're doing well and bring it to bear on the rest of the community.
So for me, you are a resource that would help me understand the best practices of industry and of the military and of education and of the sciences to bring all of this together that would help me look at my organization and the threats that I'm exposed to so that I can react appropriately in a crisis.
So what we would do in your situation, I had an event last week where we talked about some of the threats. And one of the questions, where do I go and get resources? And so the panel, which represented different members of the community, of the cyber community, shared where there's resources so they can get better informed. And the idea isn't to leave you there scared. It's to inform you on what you can do next and what should you do next. And the idea of a lot of this information is out there for you to start to protect yourself if you haven't already. If you're more advanced, then we can share a next level of training and tell you what's more sophisticated ways to protect yourself. And there's groups in the private sector who do that. There's multiple ways to do that. What we're trying to do is leverage the community so that we can share this with one another. If you do it better than I do, then by all means, go do it with you. And if you're doing something really good, I want to share that with my folks so that we can share that best business practice. And we have a very specific mission as an Army. Within that mission of the cyber enterprise, we realize that partnerships are critical and that we're not going to do this alone. We're going to have to work with others. And what I challenge the private sector is find out who those others are on your team in advance. Don't wait for the catastrophe to happen, for the crisis to happen, to determine who your team is going to be at that moment. You want to know that in advance, because you might be found that you just aggravated the situation, not improved it.
So we would want to communicate it with our team, with our organization, with even potentially the public, but also with the other organizations in our ecosystem so that they can be aware that this is a new kind of an attack that is coming, or that maybe I too am an attack. Who else is being attacked? And we might be able to get a broader landscape of what an attacker is actually trying to achieve that wouldn't be normally visible.
And so, simply yes. You want to assess your risk. And in large organizations, you have team of teams. You have different silos or different groups that may be experiencing the same thing. They have to realize that or find ways to communicate when there's any kind of threat. Again, not just cyber. If there's something happening to you and it's also happening to somebody else, the aggregation of that might be something major, but the individual itself, it might not be that catastrophic. But when you realize it's happening to everybody, so let's just say a phishing attack, that's when someone is trying to attack you through your email by getting you to do something to respond to an email, phishing attack. I think, does everyone know what a phishing attack is now? So in a phishing attack, if it's just happening to you, it may be a non-event. But when you see that everyone in your organization or several people in your organization are being attacked by the same vulnerability or the same act, or you realize that certain leaders are being attacked, now you start to get a big picture that this is more than just a random act. The letter from Nigeria. This is actually somebody trying to attack our organization. You have to have ways to communicate that, ways to identify that. And you do that through practice. And you do that to where it becomes routine, where people understand what to report, what not to report. You don't want to learn that by realizing you're just became the next victim.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
And I would say practice, 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 practice. Because and develop your plan, train to your plan. But don't think the plan is going to provide the answers. The training, the planning is what is going to be very effective, because you can take that. You can't come up with every scenario, but you can see what the thought process is going to be. And so you have to train like you fight, fight like you train, so that you're at the most ready you can possibly be at any given time, because we never know when the threat's going to attack us.
We can stop here, or you can. If there's a question that I haven't asked,
I think that's good.
the other thing would be, at some point in time, it might be interesting for you to tell personally what charges you about this, what motivates you about this personally.
Yeah.
And so that we can do it now, or you can do it at some other time.
Well, it's probably the ADD, It's the challenge. For me, it's the challenge. I've had multiple careers in the Army itself, but it was always a challenge. That I wanted to be where I could make a difference and challenge not only my personal skills, but my team skills. When we practice for an event, let's say a football game, I want the ball. I'll block if you want me to block, but I want the ball. I don't want to be the guy who's scared to, I'm going to go stand on the sideline and cheer. I want the ball. I want to be in it. And I think that's what drives a lot of people in my community, is They will stay up late because they are the tenacity of it that they have, that they just can't put it down until they solve it. And we're looking for that skill. People who are, this is what they do for fun. This is them. And to some extent, I fall into that category of, this is exciting for me. I get up in the morning for this. I didn't mean to answer now, but
Nope. Well, that was a good answer. All right, so I'm going to ask the question. All right, and then we'll splice it over.
All right.
So this is complicated stuff. This is hard stuff, and it's really significant. There are lives at stake. There's fortunes at stake, and there's economies at stake. Whole communities. But why would you want to? What personally drives you in doing all the things that you're doing with the Army and with the communities?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I would say it's the challenge. I've had multiple careers in the Army, and each one had to do with a new challenge that I wasn't sure if I was able to do it. But the challenge is what drove me. Everything from flying helicopters to getting into IT security and starting the cyber branch with a bunch of others in the Army. It was the challenge of, can we do something big and make a difference? This cybersecurity is a reason to get up in the morning. It's a noble reason to get up in the morning to, I'm going to go save the world today, doing my part. And I often ask my peers and my colleagues at work, what did you do to save the world today? Tongue in cheek, but most of them have an answer. This is what I did to contribute to the mission. And the idea is that that's the kind of people I like to share my time with, people who are motivated, dedicated, and really pushing the envelope on what can be. In this case, we're focusing on the security of the nation.
Well, Colonel, thank you so much for your time. You've been spectacular, and thank you for coming from your neck of the woods to ours during a hurricane.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Hopefully I have a tailwind home.
You might have a really strong tailwind home. Thanks.